Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for The Film Fan, released in 1939. It's the 268th in the series and it's directed by Bob Clampett. You can find this on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 3 DVD set. It's also in the Porky Pig 101 DVD set, and a HD version is lurking around. It was on streaming, but, hopefully we'll get this one released on Blu-ray as an upgrade. So, I can't show you the full cartoon here, it's under copyright, so I'll have to just let you know what happens, and it's pretty straightforward. Porky Pig is sent on an errand by his mum, Mrs. Pig, that's who she's referred to here, and he gets distracted by the fact that kids can watch for free in this local theatre, so he goes in and, well, we see, a Tex Avery-esque sort of short once he goes into the actual theatre. So what you're first going to see is a re-edit of an audio commentary I did with my good friend Eli Copperman, and after that you'll hear some new thoughts from me, plus an excerpt of the Bob Clampett retrospective that I did, plus a fun little bonus. So grab some popcorn and enjoy. And with me today is my good friend Eli Copperman. Say hi!
Hello. Thank you for bringing me back, Anthony. I must say, this is I'm not going to say this is a personal favorite of mine, although I do really like that gag. But this is a very interesting cartoon in its own right, being I guess it's sort of like a blackout gag cartoon. I guess Bob Clampett, he didn't always do a lot of those later on, but early on he was definitely experimenting with like how many different types of gags he could get away with. And I remember, I forget who said this. It might have honestly been you or someone else, but that like a lot of Bob's earlier cartoons, he was basically the story man on them, and that makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't be so surprised if because some of his cartoons would credit a story man and one animator, whereas some of his other cartoons would credit two animators and no story guy at all. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of those were like written by Clampett himself, and this might have been one of them.
I like that. with the feet, I've always liked that. Because like this initial segment here, that's a repeat from She Was an Acrobat's Daughter. Obviously in black and white this time. But Cold Promise.
That's just the news today in a nutshell. This is Fox News with a cold promise. Liberals are evil.
The audiences back in the day would not have watched these one after another, so they wouldn't have cared about this repeated animation or whatever.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah, and if
but
they
we
saw,
do because we're nerds.
Well, if they saw these cartoons in theaters back then, at least it would just be one short before a movie, and even then you'd see as shown here, you'd see a newsreel, you'd see a coming attraction, you'd see a whatever, even before the feature starts. I've heard that Clampett was a huge film buff, which does not surprise me.
Yeah, so he must have loved doing this one, and he just used Porky as an excuse. It's like, you know what, Schlesinger likes the pig, and I'm tasked with doing these Porkies. You know what, I'm going to try and still do my thing, but make it work, and I think he succeeds.
It's really funny, one of the better Clampett cartoons from this time.
So those are my original thoughts, so there's actually quite a bit I missed the first time round, and some of it actually was more apparent once the HD version became available, because you can see more stuff in the background. That's not to say what's on the DVD is lousy or anything, but the high-definition versions allow us to just see that extra level of detail and makes things look a bit more crisp. So, in any case, there are two caricatures here that stand out right away. So you've got here Cold Promise. So that is a caricature of Laurel Thomas, and I've butchered his name probably due to my accent, but Thomas was a writer, actor, broadcaster, and here is a parody over the fact that he was the host of the Literary Digest program, where the focus of the program would be about interesting stories of people. And I'm of the understanding he was actually the very first newscaster when television became live around 1939 or so. But that's, of course, was very limited. Television didn't really kick off in earnest until after the war. Now, We see briefly a caricature of Clark Gable in a parody called Gone with the Breeze, which is a parody of a movie called Gone with the Wind, and that's probably his most well-known movie, maybe not as much today because of changing cultural sensitivities over what was in Gone with the Wind regarding the South and how romanticized it was and so on. I'm personally more partial to It Happened One Night, which is a great Clark Gable film. And yes, I actually do watch some of the earlier films that's referenced some of these shorts, but in this short, you'll actually see a lot more very obscure stuff, and I haven't seen all these movies, so but I'll definitely reference them anyway. So you've got Oz of a Wizard or something like that in the background, Oz of a Wizard, and that's of course a reference to a very obscure film. No, I'm kidding, of Wizard of Oz. That's it's pretty well known still today. So we also hear some references to two films. We've got The Four Feathers, that's a real British Technicolor film from 1939. Honeymoon in Bali is another 1939 film that's actually real and stars Fred McMurray. Now, I haven't seen either of those, and well, now I should really. Now, there's another interesting reference in regards to the sardine cans you see, and this is presumably based in LA. I mean, that's where the studio was, so you'd think that would be the case. But they used to have an extensive trolley car network, and of course, only the rich would actually have cars around this time. Cars didn't really get taken up by the lower to middle income class people until after the war. So a lot of people would use the trolley cars, and of course they pack them in like sardines. That's the reference right there. And funnily enough, if you want to see a movie about what kind of happened in regards to that trolley car system, watch Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I'm sure my editor Blue Genocide would agree, and that's one of his favorite films, as I understand too. It's a great film. Now, of course, Toontown's not real, but the general idea of the trolley car system disappearing from LA, well, it's pretty much covered in that movie. Now, you can see this snobbish woman with the dog walking past, goes, I don't watch movies, like that kind of real snobbish distaste for it. And people have to understand that when movies came out, movies were actually beneath a lot of the older generation. The real entertainment, quote unquote, was in operas and stage shows and that sort of thing. And, things to do with movies were just beneath them. It's like, I don't watch movies, that kind of thing. Similar to at one point in history where, unlike today, you had TV shows that, they were beneath actors like, well, only movies are real and not television. Television's beneath me. And now, of course, television is just as good and sometimes better than movies. So, it's amazing to see how different things change over the years in regards to what's enjoyed by, I guess, the more snobbish people, if you want to put it that way. Oh, and there's another film reference here. Now, there is a reference to Valley of the Giants. And, I mean, side note, there is actually a place in Western Australia called Valley of the Giants, which is a treetop walk. But no, this is not what Clampet's referencing, of course. It's referencing a 1938 Warner Brothers movie called Valley of the Giants, not The Valley of the Giants. And it actually does take place in the Californian redwoods, so it makes the joke even funnier, I guess, to those who would know the reference at the time. Now, I wish I could read some of the stuff in the background for when the woman with the dog does pass by. It feels like that there's a joke in there somewhere. I can't really read a lot of that stuff, but I do like the nice touch on the Looney Tunes sign. It's a extra thing for the boss, I'm sure. And speaking of Looney Tunes, the Looney Tone News, that's a parody of Movie Tone News, which basically produced newsreels, which is what this short ends up parodying. So, looking at the short in terms of the gags and all that, I mean, first of all, one interesting observation I've had here is that, there clearly was no real direction for Porky. It was just do whatever was funny, So in this case, Porky's a kid again. So you had other films where he's like a farmer and all this other stuff. And, in Tasman films, he tended to be older in some shorts and younger. And, of course, Clampet's doing the same here. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just interesting how the different films, they just change the character to suit their needs. And, of course, here, the gag is, of course, kids see the cinema for free. And then you get this wonderful punchline at the end where it's like, hey, your mother's telling you to come back home. You're supposed to you're supposed to be running errands for me, and turns out all the kids were doing the same thing. So I love that punchline at the end. So, I like the puns in the beginning. I mean, these are your typical Clampett puns, which I absolutely adore. You got the whole broken leg surrounded by a large cast. I mean, I know my editor loves that. I'm sure he's probably laughing as he edits this. And, we change our shorts every day. I mean, it's not as funny, but I do get it. And even though I'm a Celsius man, because, we've adopted the Celsius system versus the Fahrenheit system as you guys in the US have, but yeah, 103 would be pretty hot. That'll be what? 39, 38 degrees Celsius. So yeah, pretty hot. And I like how it's like cool inside. And I'm guessing that's an LA reference there. But I do have a question for you guys watching this video. If you know the answer, I'd be curious to know. Was there a reason older films used today, like with a hyphen, like a hyphenated today instead of today? Was it just commonly spelt that way? Was it just a movie thing? I'm genuinely curious. If you have the answer, definitely let me know. So, in terms of animation, look, I love the animation of the dog going from uppity and then turning into that wild Clampett dog where he sees, all those redwoods and then pretty much drags the snobby woman into the theater. Again, the animation in the older initial unit that Clampett had isn't as wild as what he would end up doing much later, but still, there's some great stuff in there, such as that particular scene. Now, this could be seen as a pseudo-cheetah cartoon, because you've actually got 3 different shorts that they've had footage reused from. So, you've got the footage of Porky walking down the street flipping a coin. That's from the Daffy Duck, and I think they actually flipped the image as well. So, but hey, it's a great piece of animation, so you may as well reuse it. Now, The Lone Stranger and Porky, which is the first short of 1939, is actually reused in part in this particular short as part of the Lone Stranger sequence. And you've got several theatre bits that came from She Was an Acrobat's Daughter, which is a Friz Freleng film from 1937. Speaking of Lone Stranger, it's, as I mentioned, it's interesting how the very first short of 39 and the last of 1939 for Bob Clampett actually has a reference to the Lone Ranger in The Lone Stranger. And if you want to know more about The Lone Stranger and the reference to the Lone Ranger, definitely check out that review, because I do go through a bit of history on that video. And it's interesting how both of them have, Billy Bletcher, because Billy Bletcher does the voice of the Lone Stranger, and he also does the narration of the actual matinee in this short. And I love his high-pitched delivery, how it's like desperado, like he's got that. He actually had a pretty big range, Billy Bletcher. He's normally known for the really deep voices, but he actually was quite versatile as a voice actor. And speaking of matinees, and just for those who don't know, there used to be, kids' Saturday matinees, so it'd be kind of like a precursor to the whole Saturday morning cartoons thing that happened from the 70s till, I guess, the late 90s, early 2000s, when things just happened to change. We had 24-hour cartoon networks, but here it's not so much that they were showing cartoons per se. They perhaps would show cartoons, but they'll also show movie serials, which are kind of like television episodes. They'll end up on a cliffhanger, and sometimes literally the character will be dangling off a cliff, hence cliffhanger. So you would have to come next time to see what actually happened. And since there was no television, which meant no VCRs and that sort of thing, you had to physically go there to see what happens next. And I guess if you miss one, then you sort of lost into what the story would be. So that's what that's reference to. And you have the SS Malaria in that professor scene, and that's just reference to the malaria illness that's spread by mosquitoes, which would have been less controlled then, because it was something that was still being, I guess, researched around that time, and they had treatments for it, but it was due to the fact there was just so many mosquitoes, and mosquitoes would spread it around, and so on. Now, I'm not an expert on malaria, of course, otherwise this would be Anthony's malaria talk, but in any case, malaria was definitely something that was more on the forefront there, versus perhaps now, where you know, we have vaccines and all that for that sort of thing. And, oh, of course, gotta love more dad jokes, you know, doctors always lose their patience. Ha ha, right? And the name of that professor, Professor Widebottom. Come on, right? And the baker no longer kneading the dough. Beautiful. Chef's kiss. Absolutely love it. And I know my editor loves that too, right? Right? So, alright, so now here is an excerpt of the Bob Clampett Retrospective Part 1 video for those who don't have time to watch the whole thing. So this is where we specifically discuss the film fan. At least the next one's pretty good, which is the film fan. And again, look, once again, you can see Clampett finding a way to get Porky out of the picture somewhat, where he's like, okay, he just goes into this cinema and then we can see all these wonderful gags. But Eli, what are your thoughts on this one?
Being the film enthusiast and cinema fan that I am, this cartoon it stands out from other cartoons at the time that were also doing this. I think that there was also like a Scrappy cartoon made at Columbia with this similar premise, which coincidentally I think had some voices done by Mel Blanc. Oddly enough, I think it only takes like one or two gags from She Was an Acrobat's Daughter, mostly like this is Gold Promise or Cold Pepper Promise or whatever. Just being like a nerd in film and like the history and how movie theaters operated back then. I don't know. It feels kind of nostalgic. I remember watching the cartoon as a kid and just being like, kids, admitted free. Nowadays, that's almost not allowed, even for like family movies, unless the kids just, kind of go about it their own way. But back then, yeah, it was like, well, whatever. Kids will see a matinee movie that they're going to come regardless if they have their parents. But of course, it shows up at the end. Oh, all the kids need to see their parents, not just Porky.
So at least we get a nice little punchline at the end. But so now here is an excerpt of an interview my good friend Camden Spees did with Bob Clampett's daughter, Ruth Clampett, about Bob's early days and his love of Hollywood. Now, the rest of the interview will be on future reviews relevant to what was discussed.
He and his mom were really struggling. He was an only child and his parents were separated. So he was living there for a period of time, but they were moving around a lot depending on, what they could afford. So it was difficult times back then, But he just, he loved being in LA and so close to Hollywood where he could go see all these movies.
Well, the other thing was, because I know back then in the 20s, you could walk into a movie studio and see what was going on. Nothing would be the wiser because they would shoot on set. Did your dad ever go see silent films being made?
He did. His dad was like a traveling salesman, but both he and his mother, dad's mother, really believed in his talent. He was drawing before he could even walk, and he won a comic strip contest, when he was 12, and they saw, his talent, and it was great because they fully supported it. So his dad, through his sales work, he would have certain opportunities, and there were a number of times where he was able to take dad onto the lot and have him watch for a while something being filmed. Dad loved all kinds of, it wasn't just the idea of animation at that point, like Felix the Cat that wasn't didn't have verbiage, but he just loved all kinds. He loved swashbucklers and comedies and just any kind of movie he was entranced by, and that's why he had such a broad range of ideas for the cartoons he did.
And there'll be more from Ruth Clampett in future videos relating to what shorts they were discussing in that interview. So in terms of a rating, I really do like this one. Yeah, it feels kind of like a cheetah cartoon, and it kind of feels like Clampett is trying to do what Tex Avery was doing at the time with the whole spot gag thing. But I think it works. No one's going to complain about the reused animation and that sort of thing, or the fact that Porky was just used as an excuse really to show stuff in the theater. But it's fun. I like it. This is definitely one of the better ones of this year. And of course, I'm a connoisseur of dad jokes after all, so that gives it extra points for me. So this is 7 out of 10. It's fun. It's one of the better ones of this period of time, and I'm glad that pretty soon they'll change the rules so Clampett could actually explore other characters versus just Porky all the time. But this is a great one. So that'll do it for this redo. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.